Hello again. This is Object 7 of my series 100 Objects that tell the history of Summerhill School. Now, Object 7 is right in front of me. It is the door, which is quite an unusual subject really. The door is very, very important at Summerhill because, as I learnt through our response to inspections and the requirements the inspections had over the years from the mid-1990s, I realised that one of the major aspects and problems to do with inspection was the lack of values the inspectors and visitors gave to the learning outside the classroom. So as a member of staff, as a science teacher in 1995, 96, 97, our staff had to respond to letters that were sent to us from as a result of inspections, and these letters gave sort of demands of what we had to do in order to fulfil our requirement as a registered school. Two of these was one to write a 3-year plan and to implement it, and two, to write policy statements. So I helped create this 5 general policy statements for the overall for the school, which I helped to create, assisting Zoe Redhead, and then bringing them to staff and the children. And then there were individual policy documents on different areas of the school. So there was one. The major ones were to do with assessment, and I helped write the assessment policy. Now, the way I tried to create some of these policy statements was to get a group of staff who were interested, sort of invited to the cafe, and for us to meet in the cafe and then to discuss openly what policies we should think about, why we should think about them, and what we should put in them. Now, it was interesting because the staff hadn't really discussed such issues before in terms of documentation, and a number of staff thought it was artificial, and why do we need these documents, and if we don't need them anyway, why can't we just write them to tick the boxes the inspectors wanted us to tick and just act the way we always acted. So the policy documents, in a sense, would be false, would be just false propaganda to try and get the inspectors off our back. Others, including me, wanted the policy documents to be a defence of the school and also a celebration of the school, that the policy documents should not only describe what we do, but should protect that and should value it and should be part of our defence against any further attacks. And the further attack was to happen in 1999, when, even though we had all these documents and they were working and successful documents, in 1999 we had the inspection that resulted in the threatened closure of the school and the big court case in the Royal Courts of Justice in London. So let's get back to the door. Now, this issue of learning inside and outside the classroom, it becomes very much apparent in terms of assessment, because assessment is what the inspectors are looking at, in a sense. They want evidence of learning, and evidence of learning they see as recorded assessments. So, and they thought that because we, in the space outside the classroom, in a sense there's no timetable, there's no adult-led activities, unless there's a sharing of passions between adults and young people, or young people and adults. It doesn't matter who's sharing it, what age they are, but there's no sort of adult run, managed, controlled learning activities outside the classroom, in the sense of they're not timetabled. If they were run by a social committee, they can be put on a programme for the week or whatever, and we would have activities sort of weekly as well, but they weren't on the school timetable, the lesson timetable. Okay, so I wrote or contributed to the creation of the assessment document, and I realised that we had 2 very distinct areas with the boundary in between them. We had that of the classroom. Now the classroom in Summerhill, surprisingly, is adult controlled. They're designed and built by adults, and they're controlled by the teacher. One of the roles that you get as a teacher arriving at Summerhill as a new member of staff is that this is your classroom, and you can do what you like with it. Now this has caused problems. We once had an art teacher who was told this, and before the art teacher came, those people who were called curriculum managers at the time whitewashed the whole art room. They destroyed any continuity, any sense of presence of the previous art teacher. Now this is very rare, and I'm not sure why they did it, but they did. So this new art teacher came, and they expected, from what they were told and from the area they inherited, the art room, that they could just create their own space, which they did. They were really into sort of Aboriginal art, and they were really into creativity and culture and self-expression, but also in terms of self-expression within the history of different cultural communities. And sadly, the children didn't understand this. The children felt totally disempowered within the art space, which previously that they'd been engaged with and negotiated, and they had an art teacher that very much responded to the needs and voices of the children. So ultimately this art teacher, in a sense, became harassed by, or felt that they were harassed by the students, and some of their art was defaced when it was put on public display. One of the students, amongst some, I think, would every time they would pass the door, would knock on the door and then run out of the classroom. And it was very sad in a way, because the teacher had really been set up to fail by the curriculum managers at the time. Now, so this is where it goes wrong. is when the new teacher, who has no sense of what a classroom is and how a classroom is run in Summerhill, and you have to learn that, and the best way to learn, of course, is you've inherited the space. So you talk to the teacher, you learn about what the space is and was before you arrived, and you talk to the children, you watch, if possible, the space being used, and then you if you're going to change it, you change it with the consent of the children, or you take them with you, which is not what happens in the case of the art classroom at that time. Normally it does happen. So getting back to the assessment, it was like, well, do we need to assess outside the classroom? Because assessment in the classroom is really important, and it's obvious in a sense that whenever any teacher interacts with a learner, they're assessing them, they're watching them, they're asking them questions, they're thinking about, does the answer to this question show me what weak areas this student might have, which we can focus on, and what interests the student have. It's a very positive thing, assessment. And I see it as this as well, but I see this as sort of informal assessment and as assessment for learning. Yeah? But a lot of assessment is recorded assessment specifically for others, not for the student, but for the parents, or for the report, or for inspectors and researchers, even for researchers, which can be just as problematic. So, what I wrote in the assessment policy was that the space, as soon as a child enters a classroom, they're entering a specific space that is defined by the school and by the teachers. So the classroom is it's controlled by the teacher, but in negotiation and partnership with the child. 2, assessment is automatic, within it, and it's an automatic part of teaching and learning together. But 3, the assessment can be formal or informal. Its overall aim is to help with the learning within the classroom. So the student, in going into a classroom, has to accept these values. The assessment is there as a natural part of teaching. But within the classroom, they should have a choice whether they want to be formally assessed or not. So they can choose whether they want to be tested formally in terms of exams, in terms of worksheets, in terms of whatever they're given. So within the assessment policy, it was that if children to be formally assessed, then it's only with their consent. And it's really, I was quite surprised when the first time my students did their GCSEs, I was so proud of the results, I immediately put on the notice board. And one of the girls, who was actually top of the list because she did extremely well, she came to me and was appalled. She was so angry that I made this thing public, that in agreeing to be assessed, they hadn't agreed that the assessment should be public. So I had to go down and take down the sheet and apologise to the students, which was fine. Yeah, and then the question then comes: what happens outside the classroom in terms of measurement, assessment, and teaching and learning? Well, outside the classroom is the space where there is no teacher. It's not defined. Yeah, so it's when you go into the classroom that the student gives permission and consent. And is it within, in a sense, it is an authority-based system, even within Summerhill. But that's because we do academic teaching. It's because and we do formal teaching, and we do group teaching, and it's all progressive in the sense of teaching. But it's not in the sense of the learning through living, which is what outside is about. Outside is about just being yourself. It's about climbing a tree, sitting in a tree and sitting there, which is what one of our ex-students told me. She had this favourite tree, and whenever she needed to think, she'd just go and climb out into the same tree and just sit there and think and watch the leaves and watch the insects and watch the birds. That's what you do, and that's actually the point of outside the classroom. It is the most valuable space in Summerhill. I mean, these spaces are defined as valuable not by the students themselves, but the outside of the classroom, is the place of spontaneous learning, of creative learning, of social learning, of all the learning that we do as natural human beings. And if we were to invade that space, and Neil has that famous story to do with he comes across a child playing in a puddle and playing with making a dam out of mud, and one side there's lots of water, and then they cut a hole and the water flows from one side to the other, and it's a dam. It's a model of a dam, and the teacher then saying, "Oh, that's a dam," and then starting to try and use the situation to teach the child. And immediately they've changed the space. Immediately the relationship between the teacher and the child is one of authority, of a teacher trying to have objectives that they've defined, not the child, about, let's teach. We can teach this about architecture. We can teach this about water flow. We can teach this about physics. And a lot of teachers will do this naturally. They are very proud of teaching, and that they see that they can then, as soon as they see an enthusiasm expressed by a child outside or play, they say, "Oh yeah, we can use this. It's a learning activity." I mean, one of our teachers actually suggested this in terms of the Summerhill meeting. We were threatened with closure. We were very, and the one threat was to do with the fact that we weren't assessing the students as much as we should according to Ofsted, and the assessment was seen to be about the learning outside the classroom. Yeah, the assessment inside the classroom was fine, but that would generally take place. That could only take place if they were in the classroom, and at Summerhill you choose to attend or not if you want to. So some students wouldn't be assessed that often because they didn't go into classrooms, and even if they did, they could choose not to be assessed formally within that classroom when they came. So going back, one of our teachers said, well, during all the debates about how we respond to the inspectors, they said, look, why don't we, literacy is a major aspect of this, literacy and numeracy. Why don't we use the Summerhill Democratic Meeting to help with literacy? We can have a big whiteboard up by the chair and the sec, and we can write down keywords as they're used. Yeah, and we can make a list, and then we can do activities after the meeting or in classrooms linked to those keywords, and so we could use the democratic meeting as actually a teaching resource for literacy. And we could also obviously assess the literacy of those who speak, the oracy of those who speak in the meeting, and especially the chair, because the chair would be different children at different times, and it would be quite for a number of the children, it would be an incredible stepping stone, an incredible achievement that they would be so proud of in chairing a meeting. It's very difficult to chair a meeting of over 60 people for an hour to an hour and a half, 2 hours. Now just imagine that, the very heart of Summerhill becoming a literacy lesson, the the very heart of Summerhill becoming a lesson where they would say, oh well, we'll have older children doing the writing down the words and things, but the choice of what words are important, the fact that we're artificially creating a reading situation in a meeting, and it's structuring the meeting partly through the objectives of the adults, the offsetting objectives, national curriculum objectives, and then the teaching objectives of the school. The meeting would have more value if we were actively to use it to teach literacy. I think that at that point A.S. Neil would roll in his grave. Anyway, so, I mean, the sad thing about this is that I ensured again and again and again that there was this boundary, and in all our policy statements to do with assessment and to do with teaching objectives, that there was this boundary between inside the classroom and outside the classroom. Sadly, after I left, there was a member of staff who was a very active teacher and felt and expressed the fact that if they weren't teaching, then in a sense they didn't know why they were there. And that later on they influenced the actual timetable because of this, but slowly the statements I put in about these different spaces were taken out and lessened. So it'll be interesting to see in the future how Summerhill will defend this incredible space of outside the classroom. Thank you very much indeed. Bye bye.